And now to tonight's Smackdown. Christopher Hitchens and Al Sharpton. As you know, Hitchens' book, now out 126 hours, I believe, is ranked third on Amazon. It has a benign title which wouldn't attract anybody. God is not great, how religion poisons everything. I was told that when Al Sharpton heard the title for the first time, God is not great, he said, "Says who?" To serve as umpire and referee, I have asked Jacob Weisberg, the editor of Slate, the free online daily magazine offering analysis and commentary about politics, news and culture, to welcome on the stage Christopher Hitchens and Al Sharpton. I would also like to very quickly thank not only Jacob Weisberg, but Carrie Goldstein. I worked with Carrie the last time to bring to this library John Hope Franklin and President Clinton. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome Jacob Weisberg, who will serve as umpire and referee, and Christopher Hitchens and the Reverend Al Sharpton.
Wow, I feel good. I knew that I would not. I feel good. I knew that I would not. So good, so good. I got you.
The entry music is always terrific here. I'm honored to be doing the officiating this evening. Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. I will be doing the referee's honors without a striped jersey or a whistle or red cards or flags, because these two gentlemen, in addition to being among our most formidable debaters, you may have seen Reverend Sharpton debate already. You may not have seen Christopher Hitchens debate. Our gentlemen, and I know it will be very civil to each other, although I think well, I won't hold you back. Our format tonight, Christopher is going to start out with a statement of some of the ideas in his book for about 5 minutes. I'm going to give Reverend Sharpton a chance to respond for about the same length of time. Should they need any prodding, which I seriously doubt, I will provide it. And we will go back and forth for about an hour, and then we'll have some time for questions for about 20 minutes or so before we wrap up.
Maybe more.
Well, we'll go to questions, I think, as soon as debate flags. To start with, the brief introductions. In this corner, Christopher Hitchens. I would call him the devil's advocate in this debate, but he has actually played that role. If you read his book, he recounts the story of when he was invited to the Vatican to argue, pro bono, I believe, against sainthood for Mother Teresa.
Of course, the old bitch got it anyway.
Of course, hold back. Of course, to call him devil's advocate probably doesn't do him justice, because to many people he actually is the devil, less because of his views about God than because of his views on the Iraq War, which we may or may not get into this evening. He is the author of, I believe, 18 distinguished books, including monographs on the subjects of Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, and George Orwell, a book on Anglo-American relations. I won't go through all of them here, but several of them collect his literary and political essays, which you can read, among other places, in Vanity Fair, Slate, and The Atlantic. Last week he won yet another National Magazine Award for columns and commentary. In this corner, Reverend Al Sharpton. He is a Pentecostal minister, a civil rights activist, and, as you know, a former presidential candidate. He also has a radio talk show on which Don Imus recently appeared so unsuccessfully. Unlike Christopher Hitchens, he is a man of God. He was ordained as a minister at the age of 9. Is that correct? He grew up in Brooklyn and Queens. He has led protests. He led a protest in Vieques in Puerto Rico, which led to the closing of the American naval base there. He led the protests after the killing of Amadou Diallo by the New York City police. He is, I should say, a leader in the campaign to eliminate homophobia in the black church. And he ran for the Senate in 1988, 1992, and 1994. He ran for mayor of New York in 1997, and he ran for president in 2004, making, I should say, the Democratic primaries infinitely more interesting than they would have been otherwise, and probably more interesting than they will be this time without him. Christopher, I would like to start with you. What have you got against God?
Good grief. So it hadn't really sunk in on me that as you were being ordained, when I was 9, I was just getting out of there completely. It was 9 when I thought I saw through it, when my biology teacher told me that God was so good as to have made vegetation green because it was the color most restful to our eyes. And I thought, Mrs. Watts, this is nonsense. I knew nothing about chlorophyll or photosynthesis, nothing about the theory of evolution, nothing about adaptation, nothing of the sort. I just knew she'd got everything all wrong. And of course the argument against faith, against religion, falls into 2 essential halves, not necessarily congruent, but I believe congruent. The first is, it's not true. Religion comes from the infancy of our species. I won't say race, because I don't think our species is subdivided by races. Infancy of our species, when we didn't know that the Earth went round the sun. We didn't know that germs caused disease. We didn't know when we were told in Genesis, you're given dominion over all creatures, that this did not include microorganisms, because we didn't know they were there. So you didn't know they had dominion over us. When diseases broke out, it was blamed on wickedness, or sometimes on the Jews. Or if it was by Jews, on the Amalekites, or as you will. We didn't know anything about the nature of the Earth's crust, how it was cooling, earthquakes, storms, all of this were a mystery. Well, we are at least to that extent a reasoning species. Even a conspiracy theory is often better than no theory at all. The mind searches for form. We're now stuck with the forms that we found in our infancy, in our primitive, barbaric past. Well, that could be fine, still. No nation can be without mythology or myth or legend. And there are people who say, well, it's not exactly true. Virgins don't conceive. Okay. Bushes don't burn forever. Although why that would be so impressive, I've never understood many things. Dead men don't walk, and so on and so on. Okay, it's not really true. It does come from a rather fearful period of the Dark Ages, but at least it's nice to believe it. It teaches good precepts. This, I think, is very radically untrue. I give in my book the example, which I'll give you now, of a person very much influential on my youth, and I know on the Reverend's too, Dr. Martin Luther King. My friend Taylor Branch's book about Dr. King, I would rather call him Doctor than Reverend, because I'm sorry to say I think it's a higher title of honor. Taylor Branch's trilogy about him is called Parting the Waters, The Pillar of Fire, and At Jordan's Edge. And everybody literate here knows the story of Exodus and understands what Dr. King meant when he demanded that his people be free of bondage. But if you think about it for a second, it's a very good thing that the good doctor was only using this metaphorically. If he'd really been invoking the lessons of Genesis and Exodus, he would have been saying that his people had the right to kill anyone who stood in their way, to exterminate all other tribes, to mutilate their children's genitalia, to make slaves of those they captured, to take the land and property of others, to engage in rather long and hideous and elaborate arguments about ox goring, and finally, which is the sentence that ends that, or the verse that ends that section of the book, should not suffer a witch to live, the warrant for witch burning. In other words, in these books, there are the warrants for genocide, for slavery, for the torture of children, for disobedience, for genital mutilation, for annexation, for rape, and all the rest of it. It's a very good thing that this is man-made. There are those who say that they wish they could believe, and I suppose a decent atheist could say that if only for lack of evidence he wishes he or she could. I can't be among their number. I'm very glad it is not